Hello, and welcome to the first session of the CTBUH 2021 Tall and Urban Innovation Awards Conference. I'm Carl Fender. I'm the founding partner of Fender Katsoulides, and it was my great honour to be the jury chair for the CTBUH Best Tall Buildings Awards this year. This session is part one of 3 sessions where we'll take a closer look at our Award of Excellence winners in the under 100 metre Best Tall Building category. These awards recognise projects that have made extraordinary contributions to the advancement of tall buildings and the urban environment. Please remember that every presentation over the first 2 days of the conference will be judged by the jury for the recognition of overall category winner. In addition, and new for this year, each category will also recognise an audience award and a trophy, which will be announced on day 3 of the event. So we ask you to pay special attention to all presentations in the 3 sessions of the under 100 metre category and vote for which project you think is most worthy of category winner. You will find your personal ballot on the left side menu on your screen under the Audience Voting tab. Our first presentation is 25 King, located in Brisbane, and presented by Darren Brusnahan, Head of Funds Management, Real Estate Impact Investment Group, and Philip Vivian, Director, Bates Smart. This beautifully conceived and detailed building exploits all of the sustainable, structural, and construction advantages of timber to create a wonderful workplace environment and a generous public ground connection. Now to Darren and Philip.
I'm Philip Vivian, I'm a Director of Bates Smart.
I'm Tanya Gordon, I'm an Associate Director and Project Leader at Bates Smart.
And we're here to present 25 King Street.
Thanks to Bates Smart, we love and endorse what they've done and said about 25 King Street, particularly the sustainability and how we add the IIG approach to investing in real estate. 25 King Street is an example of picking at the right moment the very specific combination of the building, the location, being the precinct, the processes, and the fundamental purpose that is yet to be properly valued by the broader market. And then, as the market catches up, hopefully we look reasonably smart and our investors do as well. We believe the showgrounds exemplifies how that thesis feeds into our business. What engineered timber and building does in the marketplace is it demonstrates a preparedness for innovation, and that is prefabrication, less people on site, less waste, less water, and better carbon attributes. And they were the things that we were attracted to the most, that innovation comes with a sense of being brave. In 2016-17, our investment decision has proven validated. We've already seen in the marketplace strong demand through the capital markets on the buy side, and we see this as prevalent today with businesses wanting to accelerate when they hit their net carbon zero target. And this building exemplifies the opportunity for businesses to proactively accelerate that target.
25 King Street is located in the former Showgrounds precinct on the fringe of Brisbane's CBD. The concept design was done for 2 buildings in 2011. The buildings were based on a typical fringe market typology of concrete band beam structures with a curtain wall. Marketing images were produced. However, the development failed to attract tenants as it competed on price in an existing market with a known product. This quote from Greta Thunberg speaks equally to the climate crisis and the challenge of this development. And it says, "We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis." And if solutions in the system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. And change the system is what we did. Based on the fact that we know that 38% of greenhouse gases come from the construction industry, and indeed 8% come from cement production alone, we decided to abandon the typical concrete band beam structure. We also know that continued emission of greenhouse gases will cause further pervasive and irreversible impact on people and ecosystems. So we looked at the potential of a timber building using a combination of CLT, glulam and LVL beams. We know that 40% of carbon in buildings is embodied in the building fabric and that 60% is operational carbon. We took this further with 3 carbon minimisation strategies to reduce, recycle and replace. So through efficient design, we reduced the volume of material used and indeed excluded unnecessary materials such as ceiling tiles. Then we designed everything for disassembly so it could be recycled, and of course we replaced concrete with timber. We know for every dry tonne of timber, 1.8 tonnes of carbon is taken out of the atmosphere. Thus timber in this building reduces embodied carbon by an incredible 74% when compared to a typical concrete band beam structure, while creating warm and humane environments internally. We also embedded biophilic principles in the building, connecting people with nature, and created a welcoming and cool lobby in this tropical, warm climate. With a shaded veranda propped up on structural V columns of timber, this design instantly attracted an engineering firm as the anchor tenant. Tanya is now going to tell you how we realised this building. Tanya.
So we learned pretty quickly that timber behaves quite differently to concrete. So one of the first things that we established was an efficient structural grid. We landed on a 6x8 layout, which allowed the beams to span in one direction only from north to south, whilst also maximising the CLT span. We opted to reduce the span from the front of the core and also in the south elevation bay, which also reduced the depth of the beam required. This was important as it allowed for services to run under the shallow beams, eliminating any requirement for structural beam penetrations. Here we have a view of our typical floor plate of the timber construction. So we're seeing the posts and beams which are in glulam, as well as the perimeter K brace around the building, and the CLT core, which includes the lift shafts and the fire stairs. You can start to see the shallow beams in front of the core and along the southern elevation, as I mentioned earlier, and also some of the perimeter beams and some of the penetrations on either side of the core, as well as around the perimeter of the building. When it comes to the assembly, I think the best way to describe how 25 King was put together was like putting together an IKEA piece of furniture where you have all of the pre-cut timber pieces, and all you have to do is drill the pieces together with the help of a couple of friends. To put simply, that's what happened on 25 King. So as you can see, there are less clutter on site. The site is much tidier. There was probably about 6 workers in total at any given time. There's less tools around, which leads on to less risk and less labour on site. Once the posts and beams are installed, the next floor slab can now commence. We're starting to see that the facade modules are laid out on the timber slab. That's one of the major advantages of using timber construction, is that once each level is completed, the facade installment can follow immediately behind. So at 25 King, we had an average of 11-day turnaround of a complete floor from structure to facade installation, which is quite different to a traditional concrete construction method where you would have to wait for 2, 3 or 4 levels of concrete slab to be completed before you can start the facade installation, as concrete needs to cure. The other major advantage of using timber is that you can see in this photo that there is no scaffolding around the site, as the facade is actually installed from the inside, so that is another cost saving for the project. With the core assembly, this was grouped into 6 smaller core modules. So at the top right corner, we're seeing 2 of the core modules that have been installed on the floor plate. How it worked is that each of the core elements are assembled on the site next door, and once each module is completed, it gets craned up and located to the floor plate for installation. Here we have a photo of a typical floor plate which had been completed. So although the number of columns have increased, the columns lends itself as part of the integrated interior look and feel. So it becomes part of almost like a joinery and adds warmth to the space. Our design intent was for an honest expression of structure and services, so services integration became a significant part of our design development. As I mentioned earlier, we opted for a 6x8 structural grid, which allowed for the beams to run in one direction only. In the RCP, you can see that each bay is freed up in the east-west direction, which means that services can run really freely between these beams without any penetrations whatsoever. You can also see that some of the services in front of the core are tucked under these shallow beams that was mentioned earlier due to the reduced span from the column to the core. The same concept was applied on the southern elevation, where we have a major services running from east to west, which are also tucked under these shallow beams. An early rendering of 25 King interior shows that our intent was for an honest expression of structure and services, including the timber soffits and any services associated with it. Part of the services integration process was to accurately size and locate each and every penetration by working closely with the services engineers as well as the structural engineers. What we're showing here is a set out point of each penetration in the building, which were modeled in 3D as well as documented, and it translates from that drawing onto the constructed assembled structural beams, including the penetrations. Here we have a view of the complete timber structure and the commencement of services installation. So we're starting to see the hydraulic pipework being installed, and it fits quite snugly in that circular penetration, and those 2 rectangular penetrations will eventually be fitted with mechanical ducts. You can also see the shallow beams just in front of the core in the second row of columns, where the size of the beam is about half the size of the main floor plate beams. Eventually, major services from the core will run under these shallow beams. There's no penetrations required along that long run of core. Similar concept was applied along the south elevation bay. So we're seeing these major ducts that run from east to west, servicing the floor plate, which are tucked under the shallow beams again. And the beauty of using this efficient structural grid layout is that we're achieving a 2.7 height throughout the entire floor plate. So the next couple of slides will be showing some of the integrated fit out from the Oricon tenancy. We have here a view of the Oricon interconnecting stairs, and we're starting to see how the structural module can be broken up into smaller clusters of informal meeting room or workspaces and still feel quite generous, and using the timber as part of the interior look and feel. In the lift lobby, they have emphasized the use of the CLT core walls and also using the columns opposite side to really emphasize the hero of the building. The ground floor contributes to the livelihood of the precinct by opening out the retail tenancies onto the street. The building entry is located at the main elevation along King Street, and so we created a line of colonnade which also gives a nod to Queensland's vernacular architecture. An early rendering and vision of the ground floor plane shows that we envisage people spilling out from interior space to external space and creating a really active urban edge. Timber still played a large part on the colonnade by taking these large V columns onto the ground, emphasizing timber as the hero of the building. Here we have a photo of the completed colonnade where we're seeing the V columns coming down to the ground and resting on the concrete pedestal, and this timber soffit that gives the space a bit of warmth. There's also curved glass that invites people into the building itself. We really envisage people to use the space to have a coffee, sit down and mingle before entering into the building. As I mentioned earlier, the V columns is really an extension of the tower structure itself and is an introduction into Brisbane's first timber building. Our design intent for the lobby sets the scene for what's to come in the office floors above. Although the timber doesn't start until level 1, we wanted to continue an honest expression of the structure by exposing the concrete core walls, but tying it back to the timber by adding a board-marked texture. A floating timber batten ceiling adds warmth to the space, and we've also added a green wall to promote well-being and biophilia. So here's a view of the bilge lobby, where we're seeing the concrete core wall with board-marked timber, the floated ceiling and the feature wall to the side, and a closer look of the board-marked texture on the concrete wall. A closer look at the feature green wall shows that we've got blades of green wall angled at 45 degrees and mirrored at every 45 degree segment, which gives the illusion of a long stretch of green wall. It also adds dynamic by changing the way that it is perceived from certain angles. So as an overall design idea, structural expression was a really important part of our architectural thinking. We opted for a full curtain wall facade, which allowed for the timber to shine through the facade. So we're really expressing it from the outside as well as the inside. We're seeing that the timber really lines up. The K-brace adds feature to the structure and is brought back to the ground floor colonnade, which rests on concrete pedestals. We have the sunshade along the west elevation, which provided protection from the sun. And here is a full view of all of the timber structure in the entire building. So seeing all of the CLT slabs, the CLT core, including the lift shafts and the fire stairs mentioned earlier, and all of the glue lamp posts and beams and bracing along the perimeter of the building. The idea that timber was really the hero of the building really shines through the facade, where we're seeing the structural elements come through and really celebrating that warmth of the timber and the amazing engineering that we're able to use, and is also highlighted at night through the clear glass facade that we were able to achieve in the building.
Thank you, Tanya. So in conclusion, we've created a building with a generous shaded colonnade with indoor-outdoor retail. This veranda-like element is raised on structural timber V columns. The entry lobby off the colonnade is an honest expression with natural materials including timber, off-form concrete and a chevron green wall composed of plants angled towards the outside. The interior office environment glows with the warmth of timber from the columns, beams and floor soffit. The use of natural materials, as opposed to concrete, steel and plasterboard, better connects occupants with nature, fostering a happier and healthier workplace. And finally, the building is designed to showcase leading timber engineering with an honest expression of materials, structure and sustainable ideologies that differentiate it from typical fringe office developments. This is not a boutique, experimental or demonstration project, but rather a commercially viable alternative to steel and concrete construction in mid-scale office buildings. It is also the first timber commercial building in Brisbane, setting a new precedent for that city. It is the largest timber office building in the world, with the largest commercial timber floor plate ever built. Thank you, and we look forward to your deliberation.
Thank you, Darren and Philip. Next, we have 271 Spring Street, located in Melbourne. This building focuses on sensitive cohabitation between beautiful heritage buildings at its base, whilst providing a rich ground-level public experience that builds seamlessly on neighbouring public realm previously created by ISPT and John Wardle architects. This building also skillfully deals structurally with extremely difficult underground conditions. We'll now hear from Jason Lorenz, Senior Development Manager at ISPT, and Bill Kratiris, Principal of John Wardle Architects.
Hi, I'm Jason Lorenz, a Senior Development Manager from ISPT, and I wish to thank you for the opportunity to present 271 Spring Street today as part of the awards program. I'm very proud to be here today to firstly present ISPT's perspective as the owner and developer of the site, and then to hand you to Bill Kratiris from John Wardle Architects to take you through the design of what has easily been the most enjoyable experience of my working life. I love this particular slide. When I'm talking about 271 Spring Street, I typically close with it, but today I'm opening with it. It quite clearly depicts the render on the left and then the built reality on the right. And the fact that the reality so closely meets the design intent of the render is testament to the dedicated and passionate group of individuals who overcame significant challenges to deliver the building in such a faithful way. 271 Spring Street that we're talking about today is denoted in the top right in red of the plan that you can see there, and it sits within the wider ISPT Lonsdale precinct, and it was the final piece of the puzzle in that precinct. The blue to the left is 50 Lonsdale Street, and the purple down the bottom right is Castleton. We purchased the site with Castleton in place, and we went on to develop 50 Lonsdale Street. And on that subject, I can say that during the early 2000s, our CEO stood on the hill at a local suburban football field. And for those international viewers around the world, we're talking about Aussie rules football here. He stood on the hill at that local suburban football field, watching the under-9s run around, chatting to an up-and-coming architect named John Wardle, who at that stage of his career had never worked on a project over 5 levels high. John went on soon after to design the building in the bottom left-hand corner, the award-winning 50 Lonsdale Street. A fantastic success, and was in fact ISPT's first major greenfield development. Fast forward 20 years, and we've just completed 271 Spring Street with Bill and John Wardle Architects, and we couldn't be prouder of the precinct that we over time have built together. The 271 Spring Street corner of this precinct is rich with heritage, and it's privy to an enviable outlook to the east across the open spaces of the Royal Exhibition Building Gardens and the medical precinct beyond. However, this little corner of the city came with significant constraints. If I hone in on just the 271 corner, I can talk about the fact that the first major constraint are the 2 diagonal grey lines or zones that you can see crossing the site. Now, these represent 2 double-stacked underground railway subway tunnels, which dictate both the weight and height of the building that is able to be placed upon them. The second, in purple, is a large electrical substation underground, and the third are 2 high voltage easements that connect to that substation, and the right-hand one there bisecting the site straight down the middle. And the final key constraint are the heritage buildings in blue. So you can see those bounding both to the, in this case, east and west, the Spring Street area to the right being the main constraint. So when you combine all those together, you can see that the constraints leave very little terra firma to actually ground our building on. So what sort of building fits on a site this constrained? Part of the answer to that question comes from this John Wardle quote. I don't know where I read it. It was in a magazine or a newspaper article or online, but it did prick up my ears, and I'll read it to you quickly now, that it says, "Architects are great persuaders, and I think at our best we do encourage those that we serve into doing more than they ever bargained for." And that is indeed the case here at 271. So I'm going to take you through a small development history from one idea to the next and to the next and to the next, all the while being softly persuaded by Bill and John until we reach planning approval. And at that point, I'll hand you to Bill and he'll take you through the intricacies of the design and the finished product. But to quickly take you through the history, In 2001, we had a less constrained site. The heritage buildings weren't listed. We had a DA in place for that little image you can see on the left there. A pretty regular little glass box, a fairly efficient design, but we had no tenant at that time. And more importantly, we were in the middle of delivering 50 Lonsdale Street with John Wardle Architects, and our focus was certainly on delivering the first major development for ISPT all those years ago. So that DA sat and eventually lapsed. Fast forward to 2010, the second image you can see there, and John Wardle Architects had a great new little concept that was able to retain the heritage on the site, because by that stage the heritage had been listed. But it was a sort of standard concrete structure, not a particularly cheap structure. Melbourne is a concrete town. Steel structures are not common in Melbourne, becoming a little bit more so, but the traditional concrete sort of structure was put forward back in those days. At that stage, again, we didn't have a great leasing appetite to go out and push the product. Moved forward again to 2014, and we switched to a far more cost-effective steel structure. Again, just as I said, a little different for Melbourne, but it reduced the weight of the building, therefore enabled us to get a little bit more height on the site without impinging on the tunnels below. That structural steel was able to create a fairly regular floor plate, but we only had a sort of 50% leasing. The numbers weren't quite with us, and we had a little bit of incumbent tenants on the ground floor retail that weren't ready to move on. So from that 2014 stage, we put that one back in the bottom drawer. By 2015 was the big turning point. A tenant came to us, Australian Unity, who wanted to have their headquarters in the city, and they were basically represented a 100% pre-commitment on a building that was the maximum height we could put on the site from a weight point of view. So those things aligned beautifully, and we started the planning process with that 100% tenant under our belt. Unfortunately, the heritage officer at the time during the planning process was not overly pleased with the design, and he gave us a 30-minute dissertation on how our building should, in fact, the tower should nestle the heritage buildings on the site in the same way that a penguin would nestle an egg. And we all sat there and listened to his little analogy. We all took that away and interpreted it in our own way, and eventually used that to our advantage to come up with an improved design. It's safe to say that 2015 design was a very efficient design that maximised the site, and the consultant team was certainly delivering on the development manager's guidance on what was going to work out best from a financial point of view. But in the end, the feedback and extra effort from the design team created the wonderful design outcome that we have today, rather than what was, in some ways in 2015, a building that worked, but that didn't have the certain flair and style of the building that we have today. So JWA, the Great Persuaders, took me all the way back to the 2010 concept, and we basically combined that 2010 concept with the structural steel cost efficiencies that had come later in 2014 and the 100% pre-commitment tenant that had come along in 2015 to get the development over the line. Or so we thought. Unfortunately, to demonstrate a little bit more of the need for developers in all walks of life to have persistence, the reality is on the eve of final submission, after we'd obtained the council officers' full support, including the heritage officers' full support, the Lord Mayor and others decided to change the planning regulations literally overnight. And what that did was rendered our building non-compliant from a building setback point of view to the streets. And from there, we had to negotiate and discuss and persuade ourselves for a further 12 months of persistence before we were granted a dispensation to be assessed under the previous rules, because we were so close, literally on the eve of submitting a design that we'd worked through with council. So we were granted that approval to submit and be assessed under the old regulations, and our little penguin was eventually approved. And now I'd like you to hand you to Bill, who's going to take you through the intricacies of the design.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for the opportunity to present 271 Spring Street, Melbourne, for the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat Awards. My name is Bill Kratiris and I'm a principal of John Wardle Architects. 271 Spring Street is a 16-storey commercial building that incorporates a significant level of heritage fabric while engaging with a well-established CBD precinct here in Melbourne. This building anchors a corner of Melbourne CBD and completes the precinct that includes 50 Lonsdale Street and Castleton Place in Melbourne's East End. Through all the iterations of design, the significance of the heritage fabric and its repurposing formed a prominent criteria for the streetscape ground plane. This project re-engages the public realm along the Spring Street, Little Lonsdale Street and Castleton Place Lane via the continuation of a well-utilised pedestrian cross-street connection initially established with the urban workshop at 50 Lonsdale Street. Our earlier involvement with 50 Lonsdale Street and the Heritage Precinct included the largest archaeological dig at the time in the early 2000s. An archaeological dig was also undertaken for the 271 Spring Street site, with significant artefacts found for conservation and display purposes. The ground plane connects Spring Street with Little Lonsdale Street and Castleton Place. A ground floor food and beverage operator will link the entry lobby with an open air stair connecting communal stair areas to the first level. Opportunities prevail to maximise the urban realm potential of the site. The ground floor level is designed to activate a permeable ground plane. Extending through the lobby are various entries connecting Spring Street with Little Lonsdale Street and an entry connecting pedestrians with Castleton Place Lane while linking back to the public precinct. This discrete third access point was designed to maintain the fine-grained character of the precinct, promoting access and connectivity with the existing activated northern light-filled aspect of this precinct. The project was not without its complexities as described by Jason earlier. The in-ground complexities in particular included electrical infrastructure easements, an in-ground substation servicing the whole precinct, and 2 Merla underground rail loops running directly through the site. Could not be in a worse position. The resultant superstructure for the building required structural gymnastics to respond to this incredibly complex context. Our early streetscape studies considered the pattern and the rhythm that was prevalent in the primary streets, particularly in Little Lonsdale Street. The podium geometry, framed openings and materiality that considered a contemporary interpretation of these existing streetscapes. Following the establishment of the primary streetscapes, we considered continuing this podium language into the finer grained streetscape of Castleton Place Lane. The brickwork material thus surrounds the available site area and culminates in linking back to the rear elevation of the Mission Building, previously not visible within this precinct. Holding off the brickwork from the Elms Hotel while establishing a contemporary counterpart with similar fine grain details and openings established this new streetscape for Little Lonsdale Street. Working with the site constraints, we established a side core condition for the building. Non-heritage fabric was removed to liberate the 2 buildings to be readapted. A continuous material palette completed the ground floor plane, working towards maximising the floor plate while providing breathing space for the heritage fabric was negotiated through the course of its development. Atriums and stairs provide interconnectivity between floors while liberating garden views to the east. A secondary entry off Little Lonsdale Street allows the proportions of the new podium to reflect the scale of the existing Elms Hotel. Finer grain details are considered with corbelled brick piers referencing the existing parapet corbelled piers. Working closely with both the asset owner and the tenant, we propose to include EOT facilities to the ground floor accessible from Castleton Place Lane. The storage of bikes is on display, proudly demonstrating the occupants' commitment to sustainable modes of travel. Activating the original heritage buildings on this site was keenly supported by the client and tenant stakeholders. The fabric of the mission hall has been extensively retained. The main superstructure for the building is carefully inserted away from the hall and the chapel and located within the ancillary spaces. In addition to the front gable roof, the roofs to the upper level chapel have been revealed with the liberation of natural light to the upper level courtyards. The curtain wall incorporates triangulated sun shading devices to improve thermal performance and occupant comfort levels. The geometric forms of the sunshades were derived from the patterns of historic roof lines of the Elms Hotel. The hip forms were interpreted and predominantly expressed to the external inclined glass facade of the building. The sun shading elements were considered in scale from the urban design perspective and also from an internal floor plate amenity. Prototyping was obviously very important to us, and our factory inspections was a key process for the quality control ahead of site installation in Melbourne CBD. The Spring Street elevation required considerable planning to transfer structures in excess of 11 metres from the Spring Street boundary. The inflecting sun shading elements were also run lightly up through the Spring Street and Little Lonsdale Street elevations, providing a unified presence to the CBD edge of Melbourne. They also formed a level of insular and enclosing qualities to the activity below on the lower level roof terrace. The transparent and sun-controlled curtain wall facade to Little Lonsdale Street and Castleton Place Lane affords views to the streets, parks and the city beyond. Here the sun blades are expressed in a large stretcher bond pattern, alluding to the brick patterns of the heritage buildings below. The typical floor plate design achieved a nominal 1,000 square metres net lettable area and included an atrium space for the interconnectivity of every 3 floor compartments to the eastern end. The entry portal for the building includes a complex yet subtle form that mediates the varying scale of the 2 heritage buildings while also reflecting the geometry of the sun shading devices above. This is an example of working closely with the contractor, their subcontractors, our modelling team and their prototype team in arriving at considered solutions for details, constructability and working with traditional techniques of brickwork corbelling. The entry lobby is planned between the retained heritage buildings and provides sightlines up and into the tenanted function spaces upon arrival. The entry lobby links the upper level of the Elms Hotel and function spaces via a transparent stair connection. The auditoria for the tenant was located on the lower levels to provide sight lines into this volume of space from the entry lobby below. Internal materiality was primarily timber for the floors, ceilings and interconnecting stairs. Operable walls were also utilised to link spaces across the east and north facades. This is a drone footage shot that we are really proud of that we took within our office, and it's providing you with some views of the Spring Street urban realm perspective of how 271 nestles within the precinct and also indicating some of the open spaces for the tenants. On that note, with the drone footage, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for your time. This has been a wonderful experience and we look forward to your deliberations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason and Bill. Our next presentation is on Arc by Crown Group, located in Sydney. This striking tower provides a surprising and beautiful form in its precinctual presence within the fabric of the city, which is in turn an artful contrast to its base, which builds on and enriches the neighbouring city ground level context, both in materiality and civic contribution. Iwan Sunito, Group Chairman and CEO, Crown Group, and Koichi Takada, Principal, Koichi Takada Architects, will now present.
Hi everyone, Iwan Sunito, the Chairman and the Group CEO of Crown Group, a property development company that is based in Sydney, building projects across Sydney, Melbourne, Queensland, Los Angeles and Indonesia. Arc by Crown Group is one of those projects that becomes a defining moment in the history of Crown Group. But also beyond that, we push what we've done successfully in the past, but taking the initiative to say, how can we make a global icon, an icon that transcends beyond time and region, an icon that goes beyond the demography of our people.
Hi, I'm Koichi Takada, Principal of Koichi Takada Architects. Arc by Crown Group was an international competition. We were invited to compete among the city of Sydney context. And what was really interesting for us, this process involved a lengthy time and the consideration, and come to look at the brief itself. It's a comprehensive brief, and this needed to have a rejuvenation of this particular area. And while we're respecting the context, we had the ambition to create something new. So in other words, we wanted to have a way of contrasting the old context, juxtaposition the new architectural ideas that could somehow coexist. So the idea of this coexistence is very much perhaps what Sydney is known for, but we want to look forward. And this sort of forward thinking is something that we coincide with the vision of Crown Group, and Iwan, yourself is an architect as well. And if I may say, you know, with the competition, we can take a little bit of risk in creating something that I suppose no one ever seen in this particular culture, in this particular context. And so this was our starting point. When we visited the site, we were struck by a wonderful conservation and heritage area of this particular heart of Sydney. And this heart of Sydney is made of, let's say, very much traditional materialities in brick masonries. As opposed to the other new areas, we start to see the contemporary materialities, glass, metal, of course, the concrete, more modern materialities. But this particular part of the site had this sort of, if you like, the forgotten past, the forgotten materiality that in today's architecture we stopped using. So we wanted to respect the past, allowing this to sit within the historic context, but the new tower would rise on top, so that this contrasting, if you look from a distance, you would see the, if you like, the future of Sydney, but when you walk at the human pedestrian levels, at the human scale, you would start to appreciate this heritage context. We call it future heritage because it respects the past, but equally talks about the forward thinking in use of traditional materials, but very much a contemporary building. So Iwan, I think the starting point of this building is really about defining a podium. And as a developer, it's quite a generous gesture to open up part of your site and to allow public into the site and experience that podium, while we could have just shut and used just for the private and commercial interests. So this generosity of opening up and creating the laneway is very much heart of this development, as I see it.
Yeah, I think what you've done there is taking the Crown Group way of developing building to the new level where we're now bringing the community together into our place. So instead of a building that often are bounded by boundary and the space of private and publics are separated, this building was carrying through people through the building. But we also took it to an amazing height. I mean, the height of this eight-story, it is almost similar to the St. Mary Cathedral's arcade space there, the Gothic space that they have there. So I think that's quite unique in the history of the city of Sydney itself. What I saw also, Koichi, that's what's amazing, that what you did with the old brickwork, that you bring this element of the old, and then you bring the modern elements within the building, which is very rare, and often modern architects tend to either do the old or really, really modern, and you ignore the past. But what you bring is actually bringing the past and the present and the futuristic architecture into one building. What resulted with that was quite magical.
And other than the public benefit as a heart of this building, it's about creating a healthy place people can live in the city. And we work really hard on reducing the use of mechanical, such as air conditions, or, let's say, creating this natural ventilation. We study this, air differential pressure. So what we did was that we created this foyer, atrium, which bring the daylight into the lobby itself. But by way of doing that, it pushes the air from outside in. So while you're in this staying in hotel, it's actually quite refreshing to stay in a hotel that you can open window and you can actually ventilate through means of natural ventilation, and it's quite a pleasant place to live or stay even for a short while right in the middle of the city. And I found it really amazing that this type of simple principle can turn this modern building into very much a sustainable living. The other thing, Iwan, you remember, the glass lift is almost a contradiction because the glass lift normally is the concrete core.
Yeah, and it's very beautiful.
We actually took it apart and created the glass lift core. The idea of this is to bring the lunchtime, the daylight would penetrate through this, through side link. Essentially, it's like a tunnel, but because of this glass lift, it draws the light and bounces the light into the space. And so, it's in some way, you would normally design inside with a strong core, structurally speaking, and then you take it to the outside. But this was essentially done outside in.
Yes. Wow.
But as you come inside, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter to bring more daylight in. So that was another element that often people walk through during lunchtime and surprised how much daylight you receive. Yeah, so this brick, we used 300,000 of this brick. And let me say sort of handcrafted because it's built by brick by a great masoner. And so the idea of this brick, although brick can tend to look very heavy, something about Arc by Crown Group, because the brick steps out, and if you like, almost cantilevering out. And I remember by regulation, you're allowed to overhang 1/3, but we kept pushing to the tipping point.
Okay.
So, it works in the unbelievable tension, but the result, you have this very thin, tapered look building facade made of brick that basically look very light. And an idea of this is to, bring more daylight, but equally to create a deeper shadow. So it sort of works from sustainable angles as well.
And a lot of people love what you do for the swimming pool here, Koichi. I never fail to see people surprised and taking the photo camera when they walk into this, what they call them, the ice cave or the pool. I mean, that's an amazing outcome for a very small space, a very constrained space.
Yeah. So if you remember that we had the challenge to split the residential entry point and also the hotel guest entry point to be the separate entry point. We initially wanted to amalgamate so that you get this big lobby, but we had to separate it, and we had to quickly find this space, almost like a found in between the car park and the building podium. It was a very narrow space, almost like cave-like space, very dark, low ceiling. So we took this as an opportunity to create something special. So the idea of this sort of lighter materials and create this ice cave, let's say. And you have this body of water. So when you walk in, it's quite calming effect for the hotel guests. But I also hearing that this is the part where most people take photo for Instagramming and becoming a very popular spot. If not the entire building, this is the really place where people come together. And in fact, in this building, there's so many places that allow people to gather and socially interact.
And being able to see through the pool right from the foyer of the hotel, the Sky Suites, was quite amazing. People are surprised with that. I think what I love about what you guys have done, or you did, Koichi, was more about that you don't just design a building that looks good, but it's contextual, that the design responded to the context of Sydney. So what you see, the language in the pool, was actually a reflection of a Sydney sandstone. What you see a lot, that wavy, organic form, it's a history, a sense of connection or connectivity to what you've created here. The brickwork, people love history. The history brings kind of people connection, and it reaches the heart of the people in Sydney. And that's probably why people continue to take photo, and we have so many influencers wanting to take photo here. We have many photo shoot requests on this one here, and we can only satisfy so many people, you know, without interrupting our residents and our Sky Suites guests. But I thought that was something that you consistently bring into your design approach, the natures into your building in a more modern way. We've been fortunate, I guess we've got a great site that kind of fit in directly into the language of your architecture, but also the shift of the New South Wales as a state wanting to become #1 again in the whole Australia, but also about the city itself is pushing on creating new things that are happening and at the scale that we haven't seen for many, many years in the city of Sydney.
Ivan, let's talk about the rooftop. So the rooftop is quite a strategic moment for us when we designed this building during competition. So there's a height limit, of course. But we look at the idea of creating the crown of architecture. So this is essentially an allowance for the architectural roof feature. And with this, we open up a space of the top of the building to residents and then the guests. And it's quite a beautiful space. When you go up there and look around, there's not many buildings that utilize this roofscape in a city. And when you're up there, you start to visually connect with the Sydney Harbour. As you mentioned, we have beautiful harbour city in front of us, and why not utilize this space? It's almost leftover space, but if you bring people up, it creates this really wonderful atmospheres. And I remember we had this sort of opening party, and there was a lot of people on the rooftop, and something really wonderful about bringing people up on the roof. In Sydney, of course, we have a great masterpiece such as Opera House in architecture or Harbour Bridge in engineering masterpiece. And these are the elements in which even children can draw in some way and express. But in today's world and today's modernized urbanization, we've forgotten such a creativities and creating that sort of identity unique to its place. So when you look around our building, essentially we see a lot of boxes after boxes of buildings that are probably built based on more economic model. But what we did together is went beyond just creating the economy in itself, but creating a sort of a legacy, as you mentioned. And again, this is not just for your company and our practice, but it is really about giving back to communities and something that people can be proud of. As you mentioned, I also get the feedback that people want to walk through the brick arcade every morning because this makes them happy before they go to work. And that's a wonderful feedback. And that's something that we are proud of associating with how people are connecting to this building and talking about it, drawing this building and sort of identifying as a part of their lifestyle, very much in a city condition.
But I think what we are discovering here, Koichi, was that not only that we're discovering what makes great architecture in the world, great architecture, and it lasted many, many years, decades and hundreds of years. It was the element, not about the technology itself. Of course, the technology that you've put in here with the steel frame and that bracing was unique. But the thing that makes great architecture in the world unique is because the experience does not date. The building material style becomes dated, but the experience in the building through many clever things that you do, the glass leaf, the ice cave. So what you're doing was actually engaging the mind, the heart, and the spirit of human being. And that's what's been powerful about a few buildings that you've designed for us and that we've completed to date. And I have seen people walking in a Koichi where they said, look, this building makes me happy. And I thought, that was amazing. We've completed this building in 2018. Yeah, and a lot of time people talk about building and they say, it's your building. But the city and the people who are embracing this building are saying, this is our building. It's a very different thing. They're no longer saying this is your building, but as you know, many of the buildings that you've designed have now been featured into a lot of the Sydney City Council guideline booklet to show what a great architecture can be.
Thank you, Iwan and Koichi. We now leave Australia and move to China for our next presentation, the Asia Financial Centre and AIIB headquarters in Beijing, presented by Li Shan, Planning Director, Beijing Investment Group, and Stefan Riewald, Associate Partner, von Gerken Magen Partners Architects. This is a highly considered rational office building which, through its reference to Chinese wood connections and architectural symbols, creates rich sculptural opportunities for wonderful communal atrium spaces within an appropriate urban form. Now to Li and Stefan.
Hello everyone, my name is Stefan Riewald from GNP Architects. Thanks to CTBUH, we have the chance together with our client, Ms. Li Shan from the Beijing Investment Group, to take you on a journey through our latest project, which is the Asia Financial Center, with AIB as the main user in the future.
亚洲金融大厦的定位是首都极具影响力的国际交往中心，以国际金融中心。同时，大厦是亚洲基础设施投资银行的总部所在地。亚投行是大厦重要的用户，所以在项目策划期会更多的参照国际组织总部的设计和建造要求，秉承亚投行精干、廉洁、绿色的核心理念，希望建造一座面向未来的 世界级的绿色建筑综合体。
This project for us was very special, very interesting because we had the chance to really try new ways of designing workspaces and office environment. What is AIB? AIB is an infrastructure investment bank for the Asian region. It consists of more than 100 nations which are part of it, and that is also one of the core features of this design task. So this is a bank that really a bank building that hosts workspaces for people from all over the world with very different cultural backgrounds. So this was a very exciting precondition for us. The project is prominently located at the middle axis of Beijing, so it is actually the last building to the north of the axis, like a cornerstone in the Olympic Park. Here you see the close-up of the Olympic Park with the bird nest, the central axis, and our building is then in a line of different conference buildings and the water cube, and our building, so to say, is then the end point of this, slightly higher with 80 meters, but still integrated into the urban skyline. So the project is not really a high project, that also kind of lead us to try a different concept for such a office building, more like a horizontal high-rise. Here you see the basic module actually of the project. So this bank building is radically designed from the inside out. So the 75% of the offices are single offices, 15 square meters, and then you have a small amount of support offices in the open plan. What we did is that we then generated floor plates in this undulating C-shaped fashion to produce a maximum of facade length to have an optimum of light intake and view relations. So what you see here is then the result of this. We have this three-story, we call it meandering bar system, and this bar we then took and shifted in different ways, so in staggered. So finally we generate a building and a structure that is surprisingly rich in terms of view relations and interior spaces. Here you see the model of the project, which very well shows the basic structure or organization. So you have always these three-story layers that are separated by the so-called community decks that take up more public functions like recreational areas, libraries, and so on. The plan is based on a typical, for Beijing, typical yard concept. We call it the 9-yard concept. You see here the plan of the building. There are no back sides. You can enter the building from 4 sides. The main entrance, of course, is to the Beijing axis. The idea behind this is to go to the, in terms of plan, go to the outline of the site to be able to generate these generous indoor spaces. I show some references to Chinese culture to also show you the way we think we managed to refer to this, but without really directly copying any historic elements. It's a contemporary design. You see here the layering of the building as a typical element. We were inspired by this famous Lubang wood connections, and we took up this shape to generate various spaces, like here these atriums that enlarge the community decks, but also details like this door handles here are inspired by this wood structures or wood connections. The lantern as a typical Asian Chinese element in the public life also plays an important role in our project. So we took the lantern to highlight all the public spaces, and they really also provide a kind of festive and nice, nearly outdoor atmosphere in the inside of this building. To the outside, we also took up this lantern element as a highlight in terms of events. So when the building has larger activities, these special light features are activated. Very important also that the building is rooted in its location, so it has this very typical solid base on which then, over which then in this case the building is floating. Yeah, and the inside, this is actually then the outcome of this staggering of these meander bars or these bridge structures. So you have a surprisingly rich and complex offer of view relations and different internal spaces. And at the same time also the way of staggering these office areas reminds or is a reference to classical Chinese roof structures. These are sections through the buildings. You see this the effort to distribute the office platforms throughout the building volume. So even you have even in the very remote areas, you have a quite good daylight intake and always different view relations also to the outside. A very important feature, especially in Beijing, is the green. We put a lot of effort in bringing nature into the building. What you see here, for example, is the service spine that goes through the building with all the shops on B1, and we planted trees there, but also on the upper decks we have different gardens. We developed this concept of the gardens of the world, which of course mirrors the fact that the building really is a community of many nations. So you find very different planting or gardens in the various areas of the project. Again, here the view to this sunken yard with a cafe here, and this is then a destination during lunchtime, of course. These are upper decks. There are possibilities to sit here at this bar or relax. So you have these, in this case, these are the bamboo plantings. We tested these areas ourselves with our team, so we also had the possibility to have a celebration in that areas. These are some of the upper gardens with different plants more from the desert areas. Yeah, so all in all, we have this very large continuous indoor space, which really is a very useful and precious feature in Beijing, to be independent from the extreme climate of the city, and to have this offer of very different flexible spaces for community activities, informal spaces for communication. This is the view to the central yard, which is the highest with nearly 80 meters, and it's marked out by a large Taishan stone coming from the Taishan mountain, which of course also is a tradition of Chinese mostly public buildings, that you have this stone element that kind of roots the building into the side, and also kind of is the element that you face when you enter the building. Show you a short movie how you enter the central hall, and also how these different office bridges then together generate this very rich and complex space. The facades of the project to the outside should be very transparent. The surrounding is very green, especially to the north. We have one of the biggest parks in Beijing, the Olympic Park, and we wanted to pull in this quality into the building, so the transparency was really important, and we developed these facades as a hybrid structure. You have horizontal cables that then stabilizes vertical steel profiles. Yeah, so these are also images from the nighttime, where you can see that all these lanterns provide a very nice atmosphere in the public areas. This is the east entrance. As I said before, the building can be accessed from 4 sides, and you can see here even these entrance yards again then offer flexible entrance possibilities, in this case, for example, to a large conference hall, so the building can be divided or can be activated in a very flexible manner. The facade is a so-called climate active facade. It's a highly insulating facade with a double layer with an integrated sun shading. In this case, these are vertical louver elements that can be folded aside electrically and are then controlled by a sensor that responds to the outside light condition. Views from the outside, that actually is a result of this development of the floor plans and the inner organization, and you see these typical layers of the community spaces. And in the night, we then, together with a light designer, Concept Licht Germany, we then highlighted this idea of this continuous inside-outside structure by illuminating all the undersides of the bridges, and this is then actually a very strong feature that can be seen from far away as a landmark. Yeah, this is our journey through the project, through this design. Important for us was to really respond to this task, to build a bank for more than 100 nations, to create a building that has a large shared space, a space that really transports this idea of openness and transparency, but also is something that really creates community and refilling for the people working there. Thank you very much.
大厦设计从空中俯视为中国结造型，寓意中国连接世界。内部结构为鲁班锁，采用重檐、叠梁等独具匠心的中国古建元素，营造低调、谦逊、庄重的地标建筑，体现了现代设计风格与中国古代建筑的完美结合，与大厦所倡导的国际交往、中西融合的理念相符合。项目落成后，这座建筑完全满足了当时的期望。从运营角度来看，项目有如下亮点：一、中庭的泰山石为整个大厦带来了美好的寓意；二、充足的自然采光呈现出一座阳光大厦。大厦整体设计采用 U 型楼板的设计，便于日照从中庭错层进入，充盈整个空间，使所有办公区都能享受均衡的自然采光，同时也节省了照明的能源。恒温恒湿，营造理想的办公环境。 大厦通过双层内呼吸式玻璃幕墙，配合智能电动遮阳系统和主动式通风换气系统，辅以 VAV 加丝管制空调系统，保证了恒温恒湿的办公环境。楼外花园、楼内公园四季如春。大厦北侧紧邻680公顷奥林匹克森林公园，大厦内种植了7株高达10米的大树，还有数十种绿色植物，在自然画廊环绕之中办公、学习和交往。低密度办公设计充分体现交流空间。大厦内设计了充分的公共空间，7个采光中庭，80米挑空大堂，10大空中花园，内外连廊等，供使用者在充裕的空间进行交流和举办活动，大大增强了入住的体验。在实际使用过程中，使用者和租户都给这座建筑一个很高的评价。大厦自正式运营以来，利用公共空间举办了多场交流活动，实现了设计思想中交往的理念。亚投行在大厦 A 座大堂举行了庆祝年会、花园晚宴。空中花园是一个举办特色活动的绝佳空间，贴近自然，氛围高雅。国际妇女节主题活动，大厦在国际妇女节举行了插花、品茶、养生等主题活动，利用9层高空间交往层动静分区，空间安排非常合理，活动得到了很好的效果。大厦在元宵节举办了猜灯谜、包元宵的主题活动，利用了地下1层下沉花园和员工餐厅的空间，参与体验感非常好，得到了亚投行外籍员工的一致好评。中国中央电视台主持人姚雪松说，亚洲金融大厦与奥森公园自然景观相邻，工作之余将整个奥森公园的美景尽收眼底，为工作增添创意和灵感。中国中央电视台主持人张宏民说，大厦内恒温恒湿，拥有80米挑高中庭，127万立方米的共享空间，非常舒适的办公体验。香港大学经营学院北京中心主任王建瑞说，亚洲金融大厦里种植了不同的热带及亚热带植物，仿佛置身在自然之中，真是一种赏心悦目的办公体验。中英文创集团总经理萨丁里说，亚洲金融大厦国际化的背景吸引了我们，也给我们提供了更加多元的发展空间。
Thank you, Lee and Stefan. For our final presentation in this session, we will hear about Kadiro, located in Vancouver. The sculptural forms of this 26-story residential building, together with the rich facade treatments, are created through skillful responses to site planning and building orientation. And this has created an extremely memorable moment in downtown Vancouver. Colin Bosa, CEO of Bosa Properties, and Gregory Henrique, Managing Principal at Henrique Partners Architects, will now present.
And some of the first conversations we had with Gregory, the architect, was that, this is a really important site to not just the city, but also me personally, because I'm going to be looking at it for the rest of my life. And I really wanted to ensure that, we did something that we can all be proud of, that I could be proud of, the company could be proud of, and that the city could be proud of. And so it was really special to us.
What makes us unique is we have what we call a Genesis matrix, which is sort of a lens through which we look at each project as unique. So you can't pick that building up and move it somewhere else. And so back to the very essence of what makes this building special as a tall building is its unique groundedness that would not be typical to most tall towers.
We're not, talking about a monolithic tower that shoots into the sky and gets a little bit lost in its connection to the ground plane.
If you look at the way in which we fractured the two parts of the tower, one is minimal capless curtain wall, which is very sleek, which is what the sunshades gets attached to. And on the back side, we have a more conventional tower with slab projections, which relate to the context behind it. So we've really tried to stretch sort of the perception of the building's height by breaking and fracturing it into two separate elements.
This is a project that's very connected to the ground and very connected to its surroundings. And I think that's what makes it so unique.
It's a building that actually responds to the city grid in a way that acknowledges the history of Vancouver. It responds to its neighbors in terms of the geometry and complexity of the way the building's been designed. And it acknowledges its special place as the gateway into downtown Vancouver. And so I think we've done a lot with what is a conventional program.
So it's a 26-story building, predominantly residential, but there is office, which is a high-end co-working space. It's plus or minus 50,000 square feet. First, if we think about the residential, and we had a range of product sizes in the residential building, from really small studios to one beds, one in dens, 2 bedrooms, and large 3 bedrooms. So it really accommodates evolution of one's life.
The city planning department had developed a very prescribed sort of cascading, rising line starting down at Stanley Park and moving taller as you move into downtown, and thus the height was defined. The larger issue had to do with how do you respond to the neighborhood context? How do you respond to the two grids coming together?
Most of the grids, the street grids in the city of Vancouver, are very square. And this particular building sits at a pivot.
It's where the old city grid from Gastown comes running up towards Stanley Park with the modern city grid. And so it's right at the hinge point between those two grids and acts as an urban obelisk, really, that links North Shore to downtown Vancouver. It's really a gateway building.
It reads differently from different angles, but it's not a overly complicated building. And I think in its simplicity is what makes it so beautiful.
It relates to the grid running into Gastown with one geometry, and then it rotates and the building fractures, and there's another geometry that faces Stanley Park and addresses the downtown grid. And that's the portion that has the beautiful sunshades on them. And then at the base, there's a series of little moves that occur that really create a more intimate streetscape. So you have a tower which is contextual in its relationship to the larger urban form of the buildings marching down Georgia Street, as well as the two city grids, and also acknowledging the pedestrian experiences on Cardero and on Georgia Street.
With the sunshades on the northwest side of the building, as you look at the building from a distance, it looks very different than as you come closer to the building and it starts to take shape in a different light, almost like sails in a wind and how they might move as the wind moves through them. And it's interesting to see and to experience the building both from afar and up close, because it looks very different from those two perspectives.
One distinguishing feature of the building that everyone notices are the large steel folded plates, which look like origami kites that shape the front of the building on the west and the south sides. The inspiration for the sunshades came from the hang gliders that come off of Grouse Mountain just to the north, as well as the seagulls in the maritime context. We wanted to create a distinctive piece of public art, really, that also acts as sunshades for the building and reduces the solar gain within the units behind them.
Some of them are up to 11,000 pounds. So it was quite an engineering feat to actually get them built. get them fast and put them on the building.
From the very beginning, we were very concerned about the quality of the expression of them, and that's why we designed them with very thick steel plates, so you can walk on them. They're powder coated in a shop, they're lifted and bolted up, and we took a lot of care to make sure that these things are going to last for the next 100 years. We were very impressed with HOSA in terms of their construction arm, Axiom, and they did an amazing job. Like this is not for the faint of heart building these things. It's the execution that actually elevates it to that level of public art that we were aspiring to.
The objective wasn't to build an iconic building. It was really to build a building that was of a certain sophistication and elegance, but really blended into its surroundings. And for this particular site, it was really about, contextually, how did it blend into its surroundings?
The goal was to obviously capture the views towards the mountains, but also to explore a way to deal with sustainability in a meaningful way as well. And sustainability has two parts to it. It has mechanical components to it, which allow the building, for example, to be a LEED Gold certified building, but also a poetic element to it, which are the sunshades, which contribute to reducing the requirement for cooling in the summer. The big issue that needs to be confronted, I think, long-term is about passive sustainability, elements like the sunshades that provide a meaningful reduction in the requirement for heating and cooling without requiring mechanical devices in order for them to occur. And I think that's something this building celebrates.
We had to make some financial contributions to the city that went towards daycare spaces.
The community amenity contribution for this project is significant. It's about $14 million, which is money that the development gives back to the community for the extra density that it got through the rezoning process. And that money went to both affordable housing and a daycare down in Cole Harbour, which we actually turned out to be the architects for as well. And so we're very proud of it. It's just down on the water beside the Cole Harbour Community Centre, which we also designed 25 years ago. It's two things. It's the courage to try, and it's the rigor to actually follow through and do things properly. And that's what made this project so special. We took what's a conventional program of an office building, albeit a co-op office building, which is sort of innovative, a conventional market housing project and some retail at grade, and we elevated it to something really special, an urban obelisk, which is a gateway building into downtown Vancouver.
Well, it was important to us to achieve a high standard of excellence in construction, which starts in the design phase and really thinking through the design and understanding all aspects of the homes. We're really interested in the details on how these buildings come together and being integrated. For us, it wasn't just about going out and hiring a bunch of other trades to do our work. It's a matter of pride. Absolutely.
The responsibility for a building to its neighborhood and context is a meaningful question. We've talked about this building's unique intimacy with the response to the two grids. It's breaking down of the massing so that it isn't an imposing object, and scale to the human being, which I think is important. There's also the social context of contributing back, which this building does to fund social housing and the childcare, which is around the corner, which is we're going to be designing as well. And so I think this building does a lot in a really meaningful way to promote new jobs as well, and a more co-op oriented office workplace of the future, and a wonderful place for people to live looking over the mountains. What could be better?
I started by saying our objective was, when we started the building, that I wanted to design a building that I could be proud of, as I drove past it every day to work for the rest of my life. And I would definitely say that I feel like we met that objective and surpassed it. Really, really proud of the building, really proud of how it's come together. The sunshades and the origami nature of the facade is striking and elegant at the same time. And as I do drive in every day and often get stopped at the light right out front of the building, it's without fail that I look to my right or look at the car to my left, and there are people in the car looking up at the building, which is fantastic. For that building to create that reaction in people is really exciting for me.
Thank you, Colin and Gregory. This concludes our session, but please remember that this is only part 1 of 3 sessions in the under 100 metre height category. Be sure to join us after the break for part 2. And as mentioned earlier, my fellow jury members are also watching, and together we will be making a final decision on the overall category winner to be announced during Day 3 program. But also don't forget, you have a vote. Each attendee has 1 vote per category to choose who they believe deserves to be the overall title winner. Be sure to complete your ballot found under Audience Voting in the left menu on your screen. Audience winners will also be announced during the Day 3 program. Thank you.